5 poetry or wisdom, 5 major prophets, and then 12 minor prophets. So 512, 5512, it's like a phone number. And then we said the 12 can be broken up into 9 plus 3. 593, 5593, because the 12 historical books are broken up into 9 that were written before the exile, the Babylonian exile, where Daniel and his friends, the 3 holy youth, they went to Babylon, and Ezekiel also went to Babylon. So 9 were pre-Babylonian and 3 were post-Babylonian. And the exact same thing for the 12 minor prophets. 9 of them were pre-Babylonian and 3 were post-Babylonian. Okay. So for today's lesson, and we'll go slowly. Normally, I've given this lesson before, and it's kind of a long lesson, so I try to, cram it in 1 hour. But we're not, pressed for time, so we can maybe do half of it this time and half next time. Owning your faith, the Great Commission, Matthew 28:19. Go therefore and make disciples of all the nations, baptizing them in the name of the Father and of the Son and of the Holy Spirit. And there's a famous verse as well, 1 Peter 3:15, always be ready to give a defense. So all of these verses tell us that we should have a reason for why we believe what we believe and be able to share it and defend it. So when it comes to evangelism or telling people about our faith, of course, the most important thing is living our faith, the way we live. So if I'm an encyclopedia and I know everything, but I don't have a virtuous life where I'm glorifying the Father in heaven with my good works and my good life and my virtues, like St. Paul says to Timothy, be blameless in all that you do. So the first thing I should focus on is the way I live, my relationship with God. Am I in good standing with God? Because I can't just have head knowledge and then have no relationship with God. I have no heart, but I only have head knowledge. So that's first and foremost. But that doesn't mean that, it's only heart. The two extremes are heart and not using our mind, or purely intellectual, not using our heart. We want to be in the middle. We want to have a good balance, which means we have to know how to answer questions. If people ask us why we believe in God, why are we Christian, why are we Orthodox, we have to be able to give good answers. So what are some of the reasons Christians are afraid to talk to others about matters of faith? Let's say you have someone at work or at school, and it's a secular person, doesn't really believe in God, or maybe you have a Muslim friend, and they're asking about Christianity. Muslims always accuse Christians of believing in 3 gods. We discussed the Trinity last time, and we showed how that the Trinity doesn't imply 3 gods, but 1 God. So one of the things I notice is if we don't have a good defense prepared, we get defensive. And if we don't have good arguments to offer other people, is we get argumentative. But if you already know the questions and the answers that are going to arise, then you don't have to get defensive, you don't have to get argumentative. You can be calm, cool, and collected and be able to give good reasons and good arguments. So if we start from the very beginning, before we get to Orthodoxy or Christianity, the very fundamental thing is why believe anything. So the idea of truth. And when it comes to truth, we can discuss 2 types of truth, an objective truth and a subjective truth. Does anyone know the difference between the 2? Objective and subjective truth. It has to do with, objective means it's independent of the person speaking or the person giving his opinion. Subjective truth has to do with the subject speaking. Like if I say my favorite color or the best color is blue, that could be true for the subject speaking, subject A, but false for subject B. Maybe for subject B, their favorite color is pink. So some truths are subjective. They're true for me, but not for you. And some people will say that about religion. They'll say it's true for me, but not for you. Or it's true for you, but not for me. Islam is true for you, but Buddhism is true for me. And all roads lead to God, essentially. When it comes to other truths, some people, really no one will try to say that they're subjective. Everyone agrees that 2 + 2 is 4. Everyone agrees that that's an objective truth. It's independent of the subject. It can't be 2 + 2 is 4 for you, and then 2 + 2 is 5 for you, 2 + 2 is 6 for me. We all agree that math and other truths are objective truths. Either is true or not true. It can't be true for one person. But for whatever reason, when it comes to Christianity or religion in general, some people will group religion into the subjective truth category, not objective truth. And so that's where we get the idea of religious pluralism, where they say all roads lead to God. It doesn't matter what you believe. It doesn't matter what religion or what denomination. We all essentially believe the same thing, or we all are going to reach God one way or another. But Christ says in John 14:6, the famous verse, I am the way, the truth, and the life. No one comes to the Father except through me. So he's making an exclusive claim to truth. And so for us, what I want us to cover today and next time is this hierarchy of beliefs. Why do I believe in this concept of truth? And then the next question after that I can ask, does God exist? And we can answer yes or no. And then after that, if I say God does exist, which God is it? Is it the Christian God, the Muslim God, the Hindu gods, or Jewish God? And then after that, if I say, okay, I have good reason to believe that it's the Christian God. So we give good arguments for Christianity. Then after that, I can say, okay, well, which denomination of Christianity is it? And then I can look into arguments, Orthodoxy, Catholicism, Protestantism. But that's really the way it works. I won't go through everything systematically this time. I'll just, today's talk is just kind of like popular beliefs that are in culture, but they're false, and I'll just go through them. And this is kind of like a general defense of, against secular ideas. Does anyone know an argument for God's existence, by the way? Like if someone asks you, why do you believe in God? Does anyone have like a reason or an argument on the top of their mind? Some of these philosophical arguments, they have names. Like, for example, the cosmological argument. It has to do with the beginning of the universe. So it's called the cosmological argument, where it says anything that begins to exist has a cause. Premise 2, therefore, the universe began to exist. Conclusion, number 3, therefore the universe has a cause. So everything that begins to exist has a cause. The universe began to exist. 3, therefore the universe has a cause. This is called a philosophical argument, where you have premises that lead to a conclusion using logical rules. If A, then B. A is true, therefore B must also be true. So that's called philosophical arguments. And there are other arguments for God's existence. The cosmological argument is one, the moral argument, the teleological argument that has to do with the design of the universe. So these are all arguments that we can give to people that don't believe in God to show them that it's more likely that God exists than not. When it comes to Christianity, how can you prove to someone, let's say you're speaking to someone that already believes in God, that you don't need to rehearse all these arguments about God's existence. They already agree with you that God exists, they believe in God, but they don't believe that it's a Christian God. In that case, how would you speak to that person and tell them or show them that the Christian God is the true God? How would we explain that? And there's different ways to do it. One of the most famous ways is looking at the historicity of the resurrection. So we look at the historicity of the resurrection. We look at the facts concerning the resurrection that everyone agrees on, whether it's a Christian scholar or an atheist historian or Muslim or whatever. There are certain facts that happened historically that we know are true. And then we say, okay, how do we best explain these facts? And as Christians, we would say it's the resurrection. Someone else might say, well, it was a hallucination. That's what explains all of these facts. Or they stole the body, or he never really died on the cross. These are all hypotheses to explain the facts of the historical resurrection. And we could use that. Maybe one day we'll have a lesson on that, the historicity of the resurrection. Another argument for the Christian God being the true God is what's called the trilemma, and that's what's up here on the screen. So a dilemma, you have option A or option B, or A or not A. Trilemma means you have 3 options, and this is called the Lord, liar, lunatic argument. Is anyone familiar with this? This is, it was mentioned first. I think the first person to write about it might have been G.K. Chesterton, and then it was later used by C.S. Lewis and a few other people. But it's a really nice argument because what do people nowadays say? Especially people that are religious pluralists. They believe that any religion gets you to heaven. It doesn't really matter. All religions lead to God. Like Oprah Winfrey, for example, used to be a very devout Christian, and now she believes that really it doesn't matter. Any religion will get you to God. Or Deepak Chopra, or any of these people. They'll say about Christ that he was a good moral teacher. Christ was a good moral teacher, just like Confucius and Buddha and Muhammad the Prophet and any of these people. They weren't God. They were just normal humans, but they were good moral teachers. And what this argument is saying is that actually you don't have that option. You only have three options. It's that because he claimed something more than anyone else claimed. Muhammad never claimed to be God. Buddha never claimed to be God. Confucius or any of these other teachers, they never claimed to be God. But Christ claimed to be God. And he didn't just, if you wronged him, he doesn't just say, I forgive you. You could wrong someone else and he would tell you, I forgive you. He forgave everyone. So it was kind of like a weird thing to do. Who forgives people for sins not committed against them? And who claims to be God? So he was doing something that was very different. So you can't say he's a good moral teacher if he's claiming to be God. Because if he says, I am God, he's either lying, therefore he's not a good moral teacher, or he's a lunatic, he thinks he's God, and again, he wouldn't be a good moral teacher, or he really is God. And so that's what this schematic here shows. Jesus says, I am God. If you look on the left side, it says, if this is true, Jesus is God, therefore Jesus is Lord. And then if you look on the right side, it says, this statement is false. He is not God. He says, I am God, but it's false. And then you have two options. If he's insincere, he's lying, then he's a liar. If he's sincere, what do we call people? If you see someone claiming to be God, usually they'll be in a mental institution. So a lunatic, Lord, liar, lunatic. You don't have the option to say he's simply a good moral teacher because he claimed too much. If he was just saying some nice things, the Sermon on the Mount, then yeah, maybe. But he claimed to be God. And so therefore we don't have that option. So this is one of the ways that we can show that Christianity is true. It's this person, how do you deal with him? How do you explain the person of Jesus Christ historically? Most people would not say that he's a liar or a lunatic because he had so many miracles that kind of like backed up what he said, including the ultimate miracle, which is the resurrection, which vindicated all of his claims. So we won't go into all of that a lot. This is just kind of like a snippet of things that you can share with people. But what I want us to do is look at false but popular beliefs in culture. And we'll go over 8 of them. And we don't have to finish them all today. We can finish a few of them and maybe move on to and finish the rest next week or next time. So the first one is science can explain everything, and then we'll talk about God of the gaps. The Big Bang Theory disproves God's existence. The universe can come out of nothing. Young Earth creationism. Evolution disproving God's existence. The accidental belief in God. And faith assumes no evidence. So those are the 8 topics we'll talk about today and next time. So does anyone know what this is, by the way? It's a very famous fragment. It's the earliest fragment we have of a manuscript. A manuscript is one of the copies of the New Testament or any historical thing. Like if you're reading something written by Homer or Thucydides or Josephus or any historic writer, the original is always called the autograph. A copy of the autograph is called a manuscript. So a manuscript just means it's one of the ancient copies, because they would only have one copy. So if it was a very famous work, like a famous poem like the Iliad or the Odyssey, they would get people that were trained as writers to copy it down manually, and it would take a long time, obviously. So this was before we had the Gutenberg press. So a manuscript is just a copy. So this is called the P52 fragment, and it's the earliest copy we have of anything from the New Testament, and it comes from John's Gospel. So the first time I came across this, I was in college, and me and my friends, we went to a talk there was an author named Bart Ehrman. He was a New Testament historian, or what's called a New Testament critic. A critic is not like someone that criticizes you. It's someone that like academically analyzes text. So it's called textual criticism or New Testament criticism. It's someone that intellectually analyzes the documents, the manuscripts, the historicity, and so on. So anyway, he had just written a book called Misquoting Jesus. And he was going around on a college tour, just giving talks about this book. So we heard about it. It sounded interesting. We attended the talk, and he showed this. And his point was, he grew up as a Bible-believing Christian. He was born again. He went to, I think, Wheaton College, and and then in his studies, he was either at Princeton or Harvard for graduate school. He became an agnostic or an atheist because he realized that there were so many mistakes in the early manuscripts. And he said, we don't even have really early manuscripts. Like if, for example, the Gospel of John was written around 90 AD, the earliest fragment that we have, P52, might be like, in the 3rd or 4th century, hundreds of years later. That's the earliest copy we have. So his premise in the book, he had become an agnostic. He was no longer a Christian. And he was saying, all we have now are copies of copies of copies of copies of copies of the New Testament. We don't have the original New Testament. We have no idea what it said. And that was his thesis in this book. And he showed us this fragment saying, and it's a fragment like this big, very small, maybe like 2-3 inches. And he said, this is the earliest fragment we have. It just has a few words, and on the back it says a few other words, and that's pretty much it. And his point was saying, you can't really know what it says in the New Testament. And so when we heard this, we were young college students. We had no idea how to respond, and it kind of like shook our faith a little bit. We went to church and we were asking people at church, like, how do we answer this? How do we, respond to this? And no one really knew. So this set me and my friends on a journey for like 4 years or so, really devouring Christian apologetics. Until now, I have a huge love for Christian apologetics. 2 of my friends, unfortunately, became an atheist. 1 returned through Christian apologetics and is now a Christian. But I was majoring in physics, and everyone around me as a physics major, very atheistic. This was during the time of the new atheism, if anyone's familiar with that, with the Richard Dawkins and Christopher Hitchens, Sam Harris, Daniel Dennett. They were writing these books like The God Delusion, God is Not Great, and they were bestsellers all around the world. And so these were the things that were kind of like in the air, and that everyone was talking about. So again, it led me to apologetics. I won't discuss too much. Maybe one day we can have a lesson explaining why it's actually not a good argument. But today we'll just talk about a few other things. So the first false but popular belief is science can explain everything. Does anyone know who this is? Famous philosopher and mathematician in the early 1900s at Cambridge, Bertrand Russell. He and another guy named Alfred North Whitehead, they took math from kind of like the time of Isaac Newton and Leibniz and Descartes, and they formalized math and gave it kind of like a logical basis to it, something called existential or predicate logic. So he was a very famous mathematician and philosopher. And he said, what science cannot tell us, mankind cannot know. What science cannot tell us, mankind cannot know. So he's saying if you can't know something scientifically, then you can't really know it. It's just like poetry. Just, a bunch of random words. It doesn't really mean anything. It's not true knowledge. It's either science or just a bunch of random words that mean nothing. So what's the problem with this belief? Because this used to be the prominent or dominant belief in all of academia in the early 1900s. And this was the same time C.S. Lewis, was teaching at Oxford and Cambridge. And this was just the environment. All intellectuals in the world at that time believed in this theory called verificationism or positivism, because you have to verify it with your 5 senses. So it's called verificationism. So what's wrong with this theory? Because eventually by the 1940s and 1950s, no academic philosopher believed in this theory anymore. Can anyone see what's wrong with it? So if we apply the criteria to itself, what science cannot tell us, mankind cannot know, is that a scientific statement? Is it a conclusion of, an experiment that he ran? No, just a bunch of words. So according to his own definition, it's we can't know what he's saying, because he says we can't know anything that's not non-scientific. So we can't know what he's telling us. So this is called self-defeating in philosophy. It's you set a certain standard or criteria, and then you yourself can't meet it. The statement that you're making can't meet the criteria that you set for itself. It's like sitting on a tree. You're sitting on a limb, and you're sawing off the limb that you're sitting on, and then you'll fall with the limb. It's a self-defeating statement. Not only that, so one, it defeats itself, but more than that is we can give examples of things that are true that are not scientific truths. The most important one probably is a mathematical truth. 2 + 2 = 4. We know that that's true, and it's not a scientific truth. You don't arrive to the conclusions of math by doing science. You actually have to assume that logic and math are true before you can start doing science. When you're about to run a scientific experiment to reach a conclusion, you're already assuming so many things to be true that you're using and utilizing, like logic and math. If I ask a little kid, if I say, all men are mortal, Socrates is a man, therefore Socrates is mortal. A little kid will know that just immediately because we understand logic. All men are mortal, Socrates is a man, therefore Socrates is mortal. Metaphysical truths. So if I say, if someone says, I believe that the universe is only 5 minutes old, but we were born with these memories to make us think that we've been living this entire time. But actually, everything was just created 5 minutes ago. God just created every single thing 5 minutes ago. You with the memories in your mind and the stomach in your food and everything was created 5 minutes ago. You just think that because you were born or created with these memories, you think that the world is much older. Could we disprove that if someone believes that? You can't really disprove it. We just have to believe by faith that most likely that's not true. So we believe this metaphysical truth that the universe actually is older. I have lived this entire time. The world is not 5 minutes old, and I was just created with memories. I can't prove it, but we accept this metaphysical truth. Ethical truths. So what is good or evil? You could have two scientists, one camp that's doing very good and one camp that's doing evil things. Like during World War II, we had scientists both on the Nazi side and the Ally side. Some were doing good science, some were doing evil science. But science itself can't tell you what's good or bad. We as humans have to make ethical and moral claims. So that's a moral truth that is outside the realm of science. So there are truths that are not just scientific truths. This picture here is David Hume. He was a famous philosopher. Has anyone taken a philosophy course in college? Yeah, philosophy is just extremely interesting to read about. So David Hume was one of the top philosophers in the 1800s. He wrote something very interesting. He said, if we take in our hand any volume of divinity or school metaphysics, for instance, let us ask, does it contain any abstract reasoning concerning quantity or number? So to summarize, he's saying, take any book. For example, take the Bible in your hand and ask yourself two questions. The first, does it contain any math, abstract reasoning, or numbers, or quantities? No. Does it contain any experimental reasoning concerning matter of fact and existence? No. So does it contain math? No. Does it contain science? No. Commit it then to the flames, for it can contain nothing but sophistry and illusion. So he's saying if you take any book, and what he's getting at, of course, is the Bible. If it doesn't contain any math or science, then throw it to the flames, because it's just sophistry and illusion. It's nothing really useful. What's the problem again with this? Was this guy a mathematician or a scientist? He was a philosopher. You take any of his books, there's no math, there's no science. we can throw it then to the flames, for it can contain nothing but sophistry and illusion. And again, this theory became very popular in the 1800s, all the way till the 1940s. So it took 100 years for these academic philosophers to realize how self-refuting this was. And these, were the intellectuals of the whole world. And it took us 100 years to realize that this philosophy is self-refuting. And nowadays, there's no academic philosopher that would hold to this theory, but it's actually still very popular on the popular level. There's an academic level and what's called the popular level, like popular level books. That just means like something non-academic. It's still a very popular theory if you talk to internet atheists, where they're just writing on a forum or YouTube videos or whatever. This is the type of argumentation you'll run into, but no academic philosopher would hold this anymore. Does everyone understand this? Any questions about it? Okay, number 2. This is called God of the Gaps, Science versus God. And God of the Gaps, you hear this a lot because they say, there's human knowledge, and within human knowledge there are small gaps, things that we don't understand. They used to be really big, and the more science and the more understanding we have as humans, these gaps are getting smaller and smaller. And so what they say is, back then, when we had these huge gaps, we didn't even understand how electricity worked, for example. We would see lightning, and because we didn't understand it, we would say, well, there's the God of lightning. We saw the sun, it seemed like the sun was going around the earth. So there was Apollo and his chariot carrying the sun and going around the world. And so anything we didn't understand, we just said, well, God did it. There's a God of lightning, a God of thunder, a God of this, a God of that. And the claim that the atheist is making is, now that we understand more and more, and these gaps are getting smaller and smaller, we have less and less of a need for God. God is getting less and less space to live in these smaller and smaller gaps. And eventually, he'll become homeless, he'll have no room to live because we understand everything. That's the claim of this argumentation called God of the Gaps. And they say, the famous phrase of the Christian or the person that believes in God, this is what the atheist will say: I can't explain it, therefore God did it. And so they're saying, you guys are only Christians and you only believe in God because you don't understand science, you don't understand how things work in the world. And there was a famous French mathematician and physicist named Pierre-Simon Laplace. And he had created this, there's a lot of things named after him, the Laplace equation, Laplace transfer, all these things. He was a famous mathematician, philosopher. And he created a model of the solar system. And instead of the Earth, everyone used to think that the Earth was the center of the universe and everything just rotated around the Earth. They had gotten to understand that actually the sun was the center of the solar system, and all the planets went around the sun. So he was showing this model that he had created to Napoleon Bonaparte. And Napoleon, he was impressed. He said, it's very nice. I like the way you came up with it, but how does God fit into this? What is God doing? And he famously said, I had no need of that hypothesis. I had no need of the God hypothesis. Essentially saying, I didn't have to use God to explain how everything works. I just use math and physics and some equations, and I can explain everything. And so this became kind of like the view of the Enlightenment period. The Renaissance and the Enlightenment and so on. Does anyone know who the first person that went to space is? There's Neil Armstrong. He was the first person to walk on the moon. The first person to go to space was actually a Russian person named Yuri Gagarin. And he went to space, he came back, and he famously wrote in the Russian newspapers, I went to space and I didn't find God. Therefore, there probably is no God. I went to space and, I didn't see God. And C.S. Lewis actually wrote a nice article responding to him saying, you don't go looking for God with a telescope or a microscope. He's not like a physical being where you try to look for him. And he said, if you can't find God here on earth, you won't find him in space. But if you do find God here on earth, you'll also find him in space. Because he's not a physical object that you go looking for with a telescope. So the major evidence for God is not in what we don't understand, but actually in what we do understand. And what I mean by that is, for example, Isaac Newton. I'm sure everyone's familiar with Isaac Newton. He was one of the great geniuses of the world. He, during the bubonic plague, his friend bet him that he couldn't explain why the earth went around the sun, not in a perfect circle, but somewhat of an ellipse. The course of the earth is somewhat elliptical. So in order to explain that, he discovered calculus. He came up with the 3 laws of motion, the law of gravity, and he explained exactly why that happens. He came up with the laws of cooling, the laws of optics. He did all of that, and then he turned 26 years old. So that's how smart Isaac Newton was. And then he spent the last 30 years of his life essentially writing theology. When he wrote his famous book called the Principia Mathematica, he didn't just say, okay, well, now I understand everything. I don't need God anymore, and now I'm an atheist. No, he actually spent the last few chapters of that famous science book praising God and saying, look how wonderfully made the universe is. And he praised God and gave all glory to God. And he said, we understand so little. He said, you know, it's like, I feel like a little kid walking on the beach and just finding a little shiny pebble here or a seashell, but we still have the whole ocean ahead of us, and there's still so much more to understand. So it's actually, the more we understand, the more we can give glory to God. It's not because we don't understand certain things and we say, therefore, God did it because I can't explain it. Same thing if, you know, we have, let's say someone that understands a lot about cars and someone that doesn't understand a lot about cars. Okay, so like maybe a mechanical engineer that works on designing cars, and then I'll use myself as an example. You know, I'm not a mechanical engineer. I don't know exactly how cars work and so on. And if you show us, like, let's say, just a simple Toyota, 1980 something Toyota, and we open up the hood and we see the engine, and then we see, like, you know, 2024 Bugatti or Ferrari or Lamborghini, some impressive, expensive car, and we open up the hood of that. Me not knowing much about cars, I'll say, yeah, this one looks better. I don't understand how either one works or what the difference is between them, like how they actually function and work. But this one, you know, shinier, newer, looks better, bigger, whatever, bigger engine. And then you can have someone that's a mechanical engineer, and he can know exactly how both of them work, and he can say this one is more impressive for these reasons, X, Y, Z. So it's not because he understands more that now he's, you know, not impressed, or he doesn't need to understand like the design, or that there was a designer for the car. Actually, the more he understands about cars, the more he'll be impressed with that Lamborghini or Ferrari or whatever. So same thing with us. When we understand more about the universe, it's not that we need God less. No, we can actually glorify God more because now we understand how intricate everything is. Like, yeah, obviously the universe was made in such a beautiful way. But then when we understand like the constants of the universe, for example, in physics equations, or we look at the cell, the human cell, and we see the intricacies of how everything works so perfectly. It looks like certain machines, like now we understand that certain machines are kind of like crawling on the cell membrane and doing all these things and communicating and sending signals. Now that we understand more, it's even more impressive. And we need more of a reason to believe in, we have more of a reason to believe in God. Last example I'll give is if I ask a little kid, I see a kettle, a water kettle on the stove, and it's you know, going off, and the water is boiling, and I ask him, why is the water boiling? I can have two answers to that. A little kid can just say a certain answer, and then maybe a scientist will give me a more profound answer. The scientist might tell me about the fire touching the metal and the metal touching the water, and it causes you know, the water to turn into steam and so on. And the little kid can just give me an explanation saying, you know, my dad wanted to drink tea, and my mom put the water on the stove. Both explanations are true. One is simply a scientific explanation, and one is an agent explanation. This person put the water on the stove. So these aren't competing hypotheses. They're just two different levels of hypotheses. Just because we can understand how the universe is created or how the cell was created or any scientific thing doesn't mean that there wasn't an agent behind it that caused these things to happen in the first place or created these things. And just by understanding, for example, the Big Bang or any of these theories, it doesn't mean that now I don't need God. So the whole idea of God of the gaps is just nonsensical. Any questions about this? Okay. The next one, and then maybe we'll call it a day and then finish the rest next time. So the next one is the Big Bang Theory disproves God's existence. Who believes that that's true? Who doesn't believe it's true? So what I'll show you is, the church doesn't take a position on like the Big Bang is true or not true, just scientific theory. What we want to show is that it's compatible, even if it was true, even if the scientists were somehow able to show us that almost 100% something like this happened, and someone is, let's say, a Christian scientist, and they see the evidence for this. Even if you were to believe in something like the Big Bang, you could still show that it's compatible with God's existence. So that's what I want to show right now. Because what does the Big Bang say? Can anyone summarize it just in one sentence? Julia. What is it? Yeah, so something similar like that, where they say in the beginning there was what they call like a singularity, infinite pressure, infinite mass, infinite everything, and the universe was created out of the singularity. Essentially, there was nothing, and then suddenly there was space, time, matter, and energy. So even space itself came into existence. And this is, we're not speaking religion or theology. This is purely scientific. Like if you were to take an astrophysics course, you're reading the physics textbook, that's what it would tell you about the Big Bang, is there was nothing somehow, and then everything came into existence, including space, including time, including all matter and all energy. And it just kind of like an explosion and just kept going and getting bigger, and the universe was expanding. So it's not an explosion within pre-existing space. Not an explosion within pre-existing space. It's the creation of space itself, the creation of time itself. This is what the theory of the Big Bang says. So when the Big Bang theory actually first became a prominent theory, it was put forward by a Catholic physicist priest actually named Lemaitre. And he put this theory forward, and no one really wanted to believe it. Because all people, all atheists, and most scientists at that point until now are atheists, they had believed that the universe never had a beginning. So even if you go to the time before Christ, the Epicureans and the Stoics, and you would ask them, how did the universe come to be? They would just say, well, it never had a beginning. Because if it doesn't have a beginning, you don't need a beginner. If it does have a beginning, then you need a beginner. You need someone like God. And they don't want to believe in God, so they said the universe has no beginning. During the time of Christ, all the way up to the 1930s when this theory came out, even Einstein, during that time, he believed in the universe just not having a beginning. It's called the steady state theory of the universe. So when this theory came out, no one really wanted to believe it. The only reason scientists came to believe in something like the Big Bang or the Big Bang is because there was so much evidence for it. There's so much more evidence for the Big Bang than almost all other scientific theories combined. And so they had to accept it reluctantly, and they didn't want to accept it because it looked like there had to be some sort of beginner to create this beginning. And so this Catholic priest physicist, he put the theory forward, and it was able to explain so much in the universe. One of the ways that a scientific theory is on the right path is that it's able to predict certain things, it's able to explain certain phenomena that we couldn't understand before. And it says that the universe came into being 13.7 billion years ago, and all matter, energy, space, and time came into being at that point. And for us as Christians, it didn't really matter, because to say that there was nothing and then everything came into existence, what does that sound like? in the beginning, God created the heavens and the earth. In Hebrew, there's no word for universe. They say the heavens and the earth. That means everything. What we mean by the universe, everything. They say the heavens and the earth. So in the beginning, God created the universe. That's essentially what Genesis 1:1 says. And so for us, there was no incompatibility. And it was actually unique to Christianity or the Judeo-Christian view of creating the universe, because almost every other religion at that point had kind of like a different creation story. It was only the Christian biblical creation story that said God created from nothing. Other religions, they say the universe was created on the back of a turtle, or any of these stories like in Hinduism and so on. There was no religion that said God created the heavens out of nothing. In Latin, creatio ex nihilo, creation out of nothing. It was only the Christian faith. And then the Big Bang came around saying everything came out of nothing somehow. We don't know how, but out of nothing, that's what it's pointing to, is that there was essentially nothing, and then everything, including space and time, came to be. Someone named P.C.W. Davies, he says, the coming into being of the universe, as discussed in modern science, is not just a matter of imposing some sort of organization upon a previously incoherent state. He's saying it's not like the rearranging of something. It's literally the coming into being of all physical things from nothing. And this is a scientist. It's not like a theologian or something. Arno Penzias, he won the Nobel Prize in Physics in 1978. Nobel laureate in physics. He says the best data we have is exactly what I would have predicted if I had nothing to go on but the Bible. So he says, if you put me in a room by myself and all I have is the Bible, and you ask me to explain how the universe came to be, it would be something almost exactly the same as the universe, where there was nothing, and then space and time and all of matter and energy suddenly started to exist out of nowhere. This guy here, Robert Jastrow, he was a NASA scientist, very prominent NASA scientist. He said, astronomers now, I'll summarize the quote, I'll read the last sentence. He says that there are what I or anyone would call supernatural forces at work is now, I think, a scientifically proven fact, that there are supernatural forces at work. So just to summarize, and then we'll finish the rest later. What was point number 1, Daniel? Yeah, remember, these are false but popular beliefs. The first false but popular belief is science can explain everything. And we showed that that's not true. One, that's self-defeating, because that statement itself is not a scientific statement. And then we can give examples like logical truths, mathematical truths, and so on, that are not scientific, but that we believe to be true. The second was God of the gaps, where people claim that as we decrease these gaps in knowledge, we understand more and more about the world. We need God less and less, which we show to be an incorrect way of viewing it. And then number 3 is the Big Bang Theory disproves God's existence. It's not like you have to believe in the Big Bang, but if it was true, it's not incompatible with Christianity. And so it's actually incompatible with the steady state theory to say that the universe has always existed, which is what atheists have said almost forever, since even the time before Christ. Okay, any questions? This is about a third of the presentation, so maybe we'll cover the rest in the next 1 or 2 lectures. Any questions about this? Okay, glory be to God forever, We'll stand up and pray. In the name of the Father, Son, and the Holy Spirit, one God, amen. Make us worthy of pray thankfully and say, Our Father, who art in heaven, hallowed be thy name. Thy kingdom come, thy will be done on earth as it is in heaven. Give us this day our daily bread. Forgive us our trespasses, as we forgive those who trespass against us. Lead us not into temptation, but deliver us from the evil one. In Christ Jesus our Lord, for thine is the kingdom, power, and the glory for men. Go in peace, the peace of the Lord be with you all, amen.